our meeting to order. At 6:34, we have a very special joint meeting with Dover and Sherborn. I was telling Kate this afternoon, this might be, it's the first one I've been a part of that's just in Dover and Sherborn. So welcome, our friends and family across the river. So the purpose of this meeting is a follow-up from the joint meeting that we had last week where we had a high-level program overview around the special education programming. We are going to now get a little bit deeper dive around the regional impacts and what's happening in the regional view lens. So before we get into the presentation, I'm wondering if there's any community comments. Yes.
Shocking.
Please name and where you live.
Jane Hauser, live in Dover. I was kind of particularly interested in this meeting and last week's meeting just because of the OT services, and wanted to make sure that everybody here really knew exactly what OT does. Truly, I don't think that my son would be in district if it weren't for OT. And it's not about video games. It's not about just fine motor, gross motor. That's a small part of OT. But we're talking a lot about social emotional regulation, and to me, that is where it's such a huge impact. Sorry, it's very emotional for me, but I just want to make sure that when you're talking about OT services, that we're really talking about improving them or realizing what they're doing for our kids. If we're talking about keeping kids in district, OT, it's not just about the numbers going up, but it's why the numbers are going up. It's not, like I said, it's not video games, it's not only handwriting, but it's truly to meet the social emotional needs of our kids, which, again, kind of factors right in with challenge success. So these guys are unreal. So just curious to see what happens with the services. And hopefully it's not a reduction, and hopefully that's a greater appreciation for what these guys do. It's nothing less than a miracle, really. So, sorry, right off the bat.
No, that's a great start. Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much.
Thank you for taking the time to come to speak. It's always excellent when we hear from parents, and when we hear from parents who have had such impactful experience from teachers. So thank you for coming to speak. I could wibble on a bit more, but I'm just going to say thank you.
Thanks.
No further comments. I'd like to move to you, Andrew.
Excellent. So if it's okay with you folks, I'm actually going to have Debbie Dixon help with this presentation. Do we have a clicker? No?
I think I need to stand in the middle.
That reaches over.
We need more of it.
I thought the same thing. So
I think that's okay. I don't think the cord's long enough.
No. Okay, well, how can I possibly do this without having my back to someone? I don't think I can.
Do you want someone to clip for you? Somebody can sit here and you can stand.
Yes, that would be great.
I probably stand and still see over me.
The cord looks short. No.
She just clicks.
Great.
Yeah.
Excel, but it didn't hold.
So can everyone see that?
Can we turn the lights down?
Yeah, I think we need to dim maybe the strobe lights. Is there any way?
I think we can.
Thank you, Laura.
So hopefully I can also actually respond to Jane's comments as we go through this, which I very much appreciate. So just as a refresher, really this process that we went through, the special education review that we went through, was seeking to answer three questions. And those were, are the service delivery models used in the three districts providing compatible, high quality, and effective supports to students? Are there any opportunities for more efficient use of resources in each district and/or among the three districts that maintain each district's vision for high-quality special education services? And are there opportunities for increased general education collaboration and/or programs that could support at-risk learners prior to being identified as eligible for special education? So those are really the the kind of overarching goals of this process. And I think what we've learned through focusing on those 3 questions is a lot. We've learned a lot. And it is true, as Jane mentioned, that one of the longer standing recommendations, not an immediate concern, but was to examine occupational therapy. It's really not part of this presentation, but examine is a relative term. It doesn't mean cut it. It just means look at it and do a self-study was one of the recommendations, and then consult with others in the field just to see if we can figure out why we have so many students receiving those occupational therapy services. And it could, in fact, be because we need them, period. And that could be the end of it. And the determination could be there's no need for any change there. So it's always alarming when you get this kind of feedback. It's like getting a report card. It's like there's got to be some bad news buried in here, but I don't think that there was in that particular goal, only that we look at it because there does seem to be a relatively, in comparison to other districts in our area, a relatively higher percentage of students receiving occupational therapy, especially as they move through the grades. So the focus areas for this evening are really autism spectrum disorders. You know, we talked about that last week. Social emotional learning and programming in that regard, and our preschool programs. We want to talk a little bit about how we are running our preschools and look at kind of our numbers for our preschools, and then any other implications as a result of the reorg that we've talked about. And this is as they apply to Dover and Sherborn at the elementary level. So we're not really getting into the secondary level here this evening. And with that, I'll let Debbie take over.
Thank you. This slide didn't transfer the way it's supposed to.
The colors are there, you just have to readjust the words, looks like.
So some of the words disappeared. Well, I apologize for that. We're going to start by looking at autism and autism spectrum disorders and the programming surrounding that. This represents the number of students, the percentage of students out of district in the various disability categories, and within the blue, that should say autism. So we have the highest percentage of students out of district who have a primary disability of autism.
And that was in was it high 50s, high 50%?
It looked like 50%.
Yeah.
And Deb, and that's elementary age students, or is that all?
That's all
out of district
That's
students?
across the whole district. And then the social emotional was, can we back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll revisit that.
Right.
Maybe the next one will have the right.
Yeah, so.
This slide speaks to the grades that students were in when they were first outplaced, and this represents a 3 years of data. So the bulk of students with autism spectrum disorders were outplaced at the primary levels and then into the middle school, clearly. The recommendations from the program audit, in addition to just in-district conversation and observation, included to develop a program for ASD students at the elementary level. We have a cohort of students ranging probably from 5 to 10 students identified. The suggested location would be at Pine Hill Elementary. The program itself would be based on the principles of ABA, or Applied Behavior Analysis. And the staffing required would be a lead teacher, paraprofessional support, and that would depend on the numbers in the program. And the program would be supported by the BCBA, speech pathologist, OT, PT as appropriate. and I want to stop there and talk a little bit about the program. The program would not be designed to place children in a separate environment. These are children who are capable learners, but they happen to be on the spectrum. And they may need supports around social emotional functioning, social pragmatic language, behavioral controls, executive functioning, or any number of things. Folks, you may have heard folks say that if you've met one student or one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. The range, and that's why it's called a spectrum disorder, because there's a huge spectrum. Some of the children with autism do require out-of-district programming, but the vast majority are capable learners, belong in our schools, and need very specific supports and approaches to meet their needs. And the recommendation in the program audit was to enhance what we're currently doing and to design a program specifically for children who may otherwise need out-of-district placement.
Can I point out one quick thing,
Please.
Debbie? So this is really important because naturally when we hear about programming, we think, okay, we're going to build a space for these kids who have this particular challenge, who live with this particular challenge. That's actually not our goal at all. Our goal always around special education is to educate our students in the least restrictive environment possible, therefore as close to their gen ed peers as possible. But some of these kids we know need additional supports, and sometimes it's a real challenge for the teacher who has 20 other students in the classroom to meet that student's challenges, and at certain times of the day they may need to come out of the traditional classroom setting. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about these programs. Is not, it's even a question of whether you would call it a home base, because we want them integrated into and assigned to classrooms. But this is the space that they could go to get specific services and assistance with their challenges.
So just to piggyback on that, what I would envision for the program would be that the children would be in a homeroom. They'd be with their typical peers. They'd start the day there. And this program would provide very explicit and direct teaching to address the specific skill deficits that the children require. That could occur in the gen ed classroom. Oftentimes it may need to occur in a pull-out basis. So the program staff would be deployed into classrooms to support children to generalize the skills that they're learning in a pull-out. Children may need a lot of repetition, a lot of review, a lot of preview of skills, and we're not talking about reading or writing or math. We're really talking about more the social prag, the perspective taking, behavioral regulation, emotional regulation. So it's fluid. I see it. Some children may need to be in the program a little bit more. Some children may not need to be in that classroom at all. So each child would be programmed for individually and supported by program staff, who would then increase the capacity of the knowledge of everybody in the district. They would become our in-house experts and share their knowledge and expertise. I also see the program offering the possibility of children from Dover as needed to be able to go to Pine Hill if they needed this program. And I think that's one of the goals of the audit, is to bring the districts together to look for efficiencies and high quality programming.
So Deb, great to hear about the fluidity, which to my small brain makes it sound more of an individualized experience for the child, and the differentiated learning is more appropriate for each child, which is great. Could you speak a little bit about capacity? How many students, is there a maximum number of students that could benefit from this in a building like Pine Hill, or?
I would say it really depends on the students, but I would say no more than 10.
Okay.
That would probably be with quite a few EAs, I would imagine.
Right.
Right.
And the bullet point increase in district BCBA support, what specifically would that look like?
So what what's being recommended is to increase BCBA staff by 1 FTE this year, for this upcoming year. We currently have 1 who's shared between all 4, or the region and the 2 elementary schools, and we have BC ABAs, which are support people. We believe that we would have greater capacity if we had 2 BCBAs. This particular program would require specific and direct BCBA support. And what we're seeing is that there are needs in the other schools that require just as much support.
So for those, in the future, those 2 BCBA professionals, would one of those be assigned to this program in this building at all time, and the other would be spread between the needs of the other buildings, or would you see it again as very fluid?
Right now, given the numbers and the needs, we are saying 0.8 at Pine Hill, 0.2 at the high school, 0.3, so that would be 1 person, and then 0.7 at Chickering and 0.3 at the middle school.
But is that just a funding thing, or is that how you think the time would be split?
I think that's how the time would be spent.
I'm being dim. I'm sorry. You lost me when you said that Dover students would maybe eventually be included. So are you talking 5 to 10 Pine Hill students to start? And I'm just confused. I thought we were talking about pooling the resources.
Right now, we have, I would say, 5 students from Pine Hill that we've identified with a capacity of up to 10.
Okay.
That 10 could include children from Dover as appropriate.
Okay.
And so the beauty of having a program like this available is that if a student is having enough challenges that it's just not working here, rather than necessarily opt out, consider the program that's already set up at Pine Hill. And it speaks to another kind of big issue that we have for both Pine Hill and Chickering. You may have a cohort of students who need these kinds of services, but it's 1 or 2 strong at any given time. Mm-hmm. And so alone, that doesn't really look like a program. And it's very difficult to convince families that this is a program. Mm-hmm. It feels more like you're just assigning a teacher to 2 kids. So by pooling our numbers, we are actually building a cohort and a program that's fairly vibrant and strong enough to sustain, ebbs and flows in the population, because they do, ebb and flow. But it currently, as it stands now, the numbers are higher in Sherborn. Okay. That could swing. Okay. You have in the past sent students from Dover to Sherborn. Yep, there definitely is.
And I wonder how. I obviously I like the idea of keeping these kids in district, but if Dover kids are going to Pine Hill, I mean, what is that experience like for them? I mean, it sort of is out of district for them because it's not their neighbors, it's not their friends, they're not on the same bus.
So that's a really, really good question, and I think when we think that way, somehow we kind of think that we're so different, honestly. And I grew up here, so yeah. I think that way. I used to think, oh my gosh, these Dover kids, okay,
well, really
there's a river
kids
between us.
Until they get to middle school,
they are separated.
They do feel separate.
They do feel separated. So, but if we were, let's pretend we were one district. If we were one district and you had 3 or 4 elementary schools, which is not that uncommon, yeah. Frequently they can't afford to have 3 or 4 different separate programs. So they'll have one program and the schools send to that program. And they actually do see it as better because it's still within the district. Yeah. So I hear what you're saying though. And we would obviously be aware of that. But I would say the best evidence I have is of students who've done it. And didn't want to leave. So kids are, I think, more adaptable than we give them credit for. And we'll say a little more about this as we go forward, because it's not the only program that we're talking about.
So just one to follow on Brooke's question, press it a little bit further. There wouldn't be a different threshold for eligibility, would there, based on being at Pine Hill or at Chickering? I mean, it sounded almost like, hey, this would be appropriate for the Pine Hill cohort, and potentially Dover, Chickering kids would be eligible as well if appropriate, but that would be the same threshold for
Yes.
kids from each school.
Right. So it wouldn't be like, Sherborn kids always take precedent or anything like that. It's if Dover had a kid who needed these kinds of services, we would do everything we could to send the Dover student. I don't anticipate us being up in that 10 range. What we could see over time is, and being completely candid here, what we could see over time is the need for 2 ASD programs, and one for kind of the pre-K to 2 or 3 or to 2, and then one for 3 to 5, because the age differences start to become a factor. But this is really about getting us rolling. And we do believe we have the cohort here now, and this is why it was a recommendation from from Dorsey Yearly.
Based on the October 1 head count, autism was the 3rd highest disability category, and we have a lot of students who are undiagnosed. So there are a lot of students who have needs in this area, and I'm hoping that this is more visionary or preventative, because our numbers are getting higher, and from the preschool on up. So I think having a program in place, catching these students at the primary level, that's the focus, the focused grades would behoove us, and it may grow as students continue to come in.
Is there, and this would perhaps apply if there are other potential programs that would be modeled like this, is there a risk of having a child at the school that doesn't have the program not identified early enough because perhaps the general ed teachers aren't as accustomed to working with that population, so maybe they wouldn't recognize?
I don't think so. I don't think that's a risk. I think that the teams and the teachers are well aware of children with autism, and they've seen the range already, and they've programmed for them. I think this programming is more efficient than providing one-to-one assistance to them. It provides a team of skilled professionals to support each and every child. And I also see the team here as the district resources, the districts, that's plural, resources, and they could certainly go across the river and work with other teams to share their information.
Also, importantly, is the fact that we're not recommending not having a BCBA here. So kind of to speak to your concerns, our goal would always be to keep the kids here if they could stay. Mm-hmm. But if they need more intensive services, we would have a place to offer, which I think for some people would be a much better alternative than to have their kid get on a bus and go 35, 40 minutes to some other place without any Dover or Sherborn peers. So
I just had a question about what support for classroom teachers would look like. So I think that ideally we have all students together, and it's good for all students, not just the students with autism. And I think classroom teachers also need support when they're managing and differentiating for lots of different kinds of kids. So are these kids who would have one-to-one aides? Are we imagining there's co-teaching happening? What kind of extra support will there be in?
So we would envision the program staff, and that would include the lead teacher and any paraprofessionals would be moving into the classrooms with the students in the program and supporting the teachers. There'd be consultation, there'd be training, but the support would be there from the program staff.
So
the
there,
BCBA, the speech, they would work as a team
Okay.
to support the children wherever they are and as needed.
okay, so there would be enough people, say there are 5 kids in 5 different classrooms, not necessarily to have one extra adult in each classroom at every minute, but there would be enough capacity
Yes.
to support the teachers. Okay.
Can I just ask, sorry, on numbers, I just want to understand, because we had the big pie chart with 50% autism spectrum of out-of-district students, and yet the 5 seems quite small to me. I'm just trying to understand what, if we look at the children who would benefit from ASD's programming, who are elementary age in both buildings plus out of district, how big is that number?
It's over 30.
Okay.
Yes.
It's probably closer to 45 if we include out of district.
K through 12. K through 12.
K through 12.
K through 12, not elementary.
So if it was just elementary, elementary would be about 30? Did you say? Approximately.
I think so.
Okay. So that no, I don't want to have any lens into each individual student's needs, but to me that's really quite exciting. That perhaps there may be a chance, as you said, for a return to in-district for some of those out-of-district children. Is that
Potentially.
Is that potential?
I think what Debbie would probably concur is that when families leave, it's a pretty traumatic experience for them, and it can be difficult to convince people to come back.
Sure.
Some families will ask if they can, if something becomes available. But I think what we're looking at this, and that would be nice, and we would certainly consider that. But I think what we're looking at is really kind of staving this apparent flow.
Right. So looking in 5 years' time, that 30 would be much less because we
It would be much less. Yes, it would be much less, which is good for the kids. It's good for all kids, and it is being efficient. It's being smart with our resources and serving our kids as best we can right here. I have found as a principal, and I know Amanda can speak to this, there were in that experience we brought back an autism program, and there were a lot of concerns. People were concerned. Can we serve this population of kids? Can we make it work? And it was interesting because I thought not only was it so good for the kids who had these challenges and lived with these challenges in their families, but it was good for the teachers who did not have these students and for the students to know these young people and to form relationships with them and to help out. It was good for the soul of that school. That's the best way I can describe it. It really was.
I don't want to belabor the point, but in terms of the numbers, we have lots of students with autism spectrum disorders, some of whom are just regular ed students. We have some students who are on 504 plans, and then we have our number of students who are on IEPs. So again, there's a range, and they all are different. There are some students who have more intensive needs that we're hoping to address through this type of programming.
And the professional development, did we speak to that yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
So that's joint. I wrote joint professional development, and that means between gen ed and special ed. One of the recommendations throughout the report was to increase the capacity of gen ed on behalf of special ed students and vice versa, to increase collaboration, coordination, and professional development. And with a new program like this, we would want to do a lot of professional development collaboratively. Okay, this slide also was corrupted, but
Now you see autism.
but at least you have
45%.
the green in this slide represents the percentage of students out of district for social emotional reasons, and the number is 33%. And again, this bar graph shows you the age or the grade at which students were outplaced. So it's across the board, but the majority left at upper elementary, middle school, and into the high school. So the recommendations here are many and varied. We are excited about the possibility of increasing school psych at the FTE at Pine Hill. It's currently a 0.8, so that's 4 days a week, and the recommendation is to increase it to full-time. We are working to refine and enhance the SEL programming that currently exists at Chickering. We want to create more robust general ed programmatic interventions at the elementary school, and this would include open circle curriculum, which is a social curriculum, and responsive classroom, which is more of an approach to working with students. And coupled together, they would address all of the areas, or most of the areas, that are the competencies that are identified for social emotional learning. If students aren't able to develop the skills through open circle and responsive classroom, we need to identify those students. And another recommendation for next year is to implement social emotional learning screening tool, just as we do for reading and math. We will be screening for social emotional learning. And we've had a couple of conversations and a webinar with the folks who would be doing the company that has developed this. The screening is aligned to Open Circle curriculum. It's based on the CASEL standards, the competencies that we hope all of our students will acquire. And if students are red flagged through screening, then we'll have the capacity to provide more intense and targeted interventions.
So that's an important piece, the targeting of interventions. Instead of just saying, let's blanket coverage this population with this information, where some of the kids don't need shoring up in the majority of the areas, we'll now know, and that's why it's so important to have benchmark data. We'll now know where they were and where they stand in terms of other students in their peer group, and where the specific areas of focus should be. So that to me is a really important piece. And by the way, while I have this opportunity, there's a publication out there, I believe it's A Nation at Hope. So you may have heard of A Nation at Risk, and that came out maybe 15, probably 20 years ago now. And it was all the recommendations for where schools should be going, and it was I think well thought of. I think people felt like it was a good research-based series of recommendations. So this Nation of Hope is actually it's a follow-up to that, and it really looks good. I just had a few minutes to check it out, but interestingly, when you look at some of the recommendations from that, which are easy to find, you just Google it and you'll see the recommendations right in there. This aligns perfectly with it. So including the kind of the work that we're doing with the Innovation Committee, you'll see a real dovetail, which is, I was really psyched to see that, I have to say. So sorry.
Nope, thank you. You've already heard that the plan is to expand the Director of Guidance to pre-K to 12 positions so we can align and coordinate the supports and services to students consistently across the buildings and up through the grades. All of this would, of course, require joint professional development, the collaboration and work with gen ed and special ed, and actually all teachers together and collaboratively. We're focused on that for next year and working to secure folks to be providing this professional development to the entire district. And just as an aside, I know it's not relevant to Dover and Sherborn right now, but because of the need for social emotional programming at the upper levels, we're recommending to start a social emotional program at the middle school, similar to the ASD program in nature with a lead teacher and the supports in class, in the program, and then deployed to classes to support children. So we'll start at the middle school and as needed expand upward to the high school and down to the elementary.
Sorry. Oh, did you?
I do have a question too.
Yeah, we might have the same question.
Oh, I wonder, is there at the middle school currently an SAL program for all students?
No, nothing, no. Do you mean a curriculum?
Yeah.
No.
Now they're exploring at this point in time, and that would be part of this as well.
Would the guidance counselors at the middle school be involved with that, or this would be a separate program?
We're thinking there would be a separate program, but we would hope that everybody would be involved. It's not, it's not isolating, an isolated program. So it would be staffed with a lead teacher, a counselor. The students would still have access to guidance. There might be a team approach. There would be paraprofessionals to support the children in gen ed classes.
Would it be a similar model to the autism program that you were? Okay.
A little bit, yeah.
Can you just give just a brief, tell us what the SEL screening might look like and what grades is it? Would it be done in every grade or how would that roll out?
So the program that we're looking at is called DESSA. It's DESSA, and it stands for Devereaux.
Emotional screening, something.
So emotional screening, I can't remember. It's the screening itself is an 8-question survey that teachers would complete in October or thereabouts for each child in the class. It does not take a lot of time. And then the scores are tallied and red flags are raised for certain students. If the student demonstrates a need in a certain area, there's possibility of doing more intense DESSA evaluation, and then we can target the needs that surface from that.
The teachers are reporting on their observations or their...
It's observational.
Okay.
There's training that goes along with it. And then children are also re-screened at the end of the year, or more frequently as needed. If students were targeted for assistance, it might be another screening in January and then another one in May.
It's K through 8.
K through 8.
And all students are screened.
Yes.
Are they screened one-on-one with a teacher, or just
No, the
on
teacher
a computer screen, or?
The teacher completes the screening. So it's not really
walking around and observing
just
the
based
first
on
month of school.
Based on knowledge acquired in the first month of school.
So the students don't even know what's happening, I guess.
No,
that's my
no.
question. Okay.
And Beth, did you say that this would take place at the elementary level or take place K through 8?
K through 8 that's right now. Obviously, once we identify a social emotional program at the middle school, we'll have to revisit that, but that's the thinking at this point.
Michael, do you have a question?
I can't frame it particularly well, but I mean, generally what I'm thinking about is whether this is, I mean, this seems to be a kind of a spectrum as well, and it seems much more kind of integrated. I don't know, general ed, special ed. It's really there's no kind of necessary dividing line. That there's a continuum of services for any child who may need a little bit or a lot.
Yes, but students assigned to the program, as well as the ASD program, are students whose needs go beyond the normal scope of the services that have been available. So for the middle school program, these are students who need a lot of work in self-regulation, coping strategies. They may be overwhelmed with social demands, the academic demands that the middle school presents. At the middle school, we see a lot of students when their hormones kick in. If they're predisposed to some mental health issues, we see it emerge a lot. And we don't have a great capacity right now to support the students. And that's why they're out of district. So we feel that we can better serve them in district with our own programming.
And I guess this area seems to me an area where we could use resources to, address both the fact that there are a lot of kids out of district, but also the increasing year-over-year need for services relating to social emotional needs, which may be episodic, right, at particular times, similar to academic needs, right? There might be a point of stress or where a child who maybe hasn't been identified in the screening needs some service. Would this respond to that or not really?
Not really.
This program wouldn't, but there will be supports in place. So if you think of, we're so accustomed to talking about like math services and reading services for kiddos. So if you think about having, everyday math as the standard program in every classroom, and then for kiddos who, take an assessment and are having difficulty with addition, there might be small group math available for them for a short amount of time to catch them up. So if we have open circle and responsive classroom across every classroom within the school, and then we have the DESA screener and students rise to the top who need a little bit of help here and a little bit of help there, we'll have small groups available, by adjustment counselors or school psychologists before we get to the level of needing to be part of the program because they have a long-term need and a much more intensive need.
So kind of like an RTI equivalent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Well done.
we do have, the center at Chickering, but if that were to become more of a therapeutic learning center, there's potentially the need for more services. And so we're still kind of working that out a little bit, but at some point we believe, and it seemed pretty clear to me in the recommendations from the auditors, that we need social emotional programming pre-K to 12. And given that we've started to establish that at Chickering, that may be where the program for our kids with the most intensive needs end up.
So you're saying, similar to what we were talking about with the autism program, there might be a home-based type of situation that Chickering could be the appropriate place.
Exactly. So if the things really are not working out at Pine Hill, that would be the best alternative.
But we're not there yet. That's just a possibility.
We're talking about a placeholder in the budget, and Don will get to that in the Dover meeting. But
okay.
Can I ask about Open Circle? So we've had it since the beginning of time, almost, at Chickering, and I just would love to understand specifically the refine and enhance means sort of change and improve. But Open Circle's been here for such a long time. So how will we be using it differently? Will we be measuring its use differently? Will we be implementing it differently? Because there has to be something different because we've had it for decades, and yet there's a need to refine and enhance. So I just would love to understand how the Open Circle, how the curriculum's still good enough for us, but if it is, then how are we going to use it differently?
So keep in mind this presentation is for both districts. So Open Circle has been part of the curriculum here at Chickering, and might there potentially be a need for supports in some classrooms, maybe teachers who haven't had the training more recently or who haven't had it at all, sure. But Open Circle is not universal at Pine Hill at this point, and we're looking really to shore that up on that side of the river.
And to kind of speak to your question, is it, how consistently is it being used?
Right.
Like, is it really being used, and are we monitoring that it's being used consistently as a system, so that we're sure everybody is having this curriculum and exposure to this curriculum? It may be just that we just haven't been watching it as much as we should be.
So I'd love to understand
focus on that.
Yeah, I think that would be excellent to understand just how the use of the curriculum is measured, how it compares, how some teachers at particular grades might feel it's tremendous. Some teachers might feel it's like a fire hydrant; they never use it. I'd love to understand more about that, because I hear great things about it, but I also perhaps feel sometimes there might be a tendency to say, oh, no, we have the open circle. When I think as a committee, or me, I'd love to understand how it's helping and to what degree.
With the screening, if I understood correctly, this dovetails with the open circle curriculum. So that screening tool that we'll be able to see if it's having an impact.
Great, thank you.
So moving on to preschool. What this slide shows you, the historical IEP data going back 5 years. So in fiscal year 15, Dover had 6 children who required services at the preschool level. Sherborn had 9 for a total of 15. And you can read across, and what we're projecting for next year is that Dover will have 1 to 6 students requiring IEPs, and Sherborn will have 7 to 12. It's given our numbers today. It's children that we know will be returning to preschool, as well as referrals that we are aware of, and early intervention information that we've tried to gather from our EI providers.
And in FY15, Dover did not have preschool, is that correct?
Right, that will be the next slide. Yeah.
Okay, so yes, there it is.
So the sections of preschool that we had, you can see here, what we're recommending. So we started in 2015 with 0 in Dover, and the 6 students that you saw in the previous slide went to Pine Hill, where they had 1.5 classrooms. So you can see the movement over the years. It's creeping up to present time with 4.5 classrooms. What is being recommended for the next year is a reduction to 2.5 classrooms overall, one full day in Dover and 1.5 in Sherborn. Our numbers, so let me give you a little bit of information about integrated preschool programming. The integrated preschool is really designed for the students with disabilities. The intent is to allow children to learn alongside their non-disabled peers or their peer models. The research has shown that children with disabilities really truly benefit from being in the presence of children without disabilities, and vice versa, I would say. The ratios per the regulations would be that we can have 7 children in a classroom with 8 typically developing peers, for a total of 15 per classroom. So next year, with 2.5 classrooms, that will give us room for 21 students with IEPs. And if you think back to the previous slide, we're close to, if you can jump back actually, they're anticipating 18 maximum. Now that could fluctuate a little bit, but we're well under the 21 students.
This is just, these numbers on the previous slide was just IEP integrated students, right? So then there would be
correct
general ed students that would be, that's part of the ratio from 7 to
right.
7 IEP, 8 the other way, right?
7 IEPs
Yeah.
and 8 typical peers.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
But that is not all. Those are also some IEP students who don't attend our pre-Ks, who just come in for services. So
that's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Important. Those aren't all in our pre-Ks right now.
Okay.
For example, we have 4 students right now at Chickering, and there are 3 others that come in for speech only or OT only services.
Okay.
So it seems unlikely that we would come in at the high end of the IEP expectation, but if we did, those children would not really be in mixed classrooms with kids who are not on IEPs. I mean, if we have capacity for 21 students total at 2.5 classrooms, and if we did end up with 18 children on IEPs, that doesn't create a mix for those kids.
So there would be 7 in each of the classrooms.
Okay.
7 children with IEPs. and then 8 typical peers in each classroom.
Okay,
So the
okay.
capacity of 21 students with IEPs and 24
I
typical
see. So the
peers.
21 is not the total number. Okay.
No.
Okay, sorry.
In the half-day program, one of the things that people don't necessarily think about is they just assume preschool's full day, but remember, this isn't just your typical kind of preschool in town. This is a special ed program, and not all of our students are dealing with the same kinds of struggles. Some don't need the full services 5 days a week, all day. Some may need less, and it might be more appropriate for less developmentally. They may be too young to go all day, every day. So that's where there's some flexibility created by the halftime in Sherborn.
And just curiosity, and I know we're coming up on time, are our ratios now, do they fit sort of the model, or are we heavy on one way versus the next, just the way the integrated school has been running for the last year or so?
I think we're heavy on the non-disabled peers.
Okay.
We have that.
I think we've exceeded sort of the standard capacity.
So is this a perceived need for next year, or are we limiting what's available?
I'm not understanding the question.
Yes, I mean,
For general.
why, I guess we're going down a whole classroom?
2
What,
classrooms.
is that
classrooms.
Sorry, I'm just looking at Dover. So is that a perceived need, or is that something that we're?
That's based on the numbers that we're projecting for next year.
Is that it's maybe to
Yeah,
is that projection for special ed kids and then extrapolating general ed, or is it estimates for general ed and special ed?
It's estimates for special ed. That's why we have these integrated programs.
And then extrapolating that to get to the general ed. So there may be a limitation. I think that the answer to your question is yes, there may be a limitation for special ed, for general ed kids.
In Dover, for example, if there's 7 on an IEP, you have 8 for general ed, and that's one classroom
Right.
And it's
There's only
capped.
4 though in the preschool.
right now.
Right.
And I guess what Henry's, I lost my train of thought because, so there may be more space, but you have to keep space available in case somebody comes in that we're not anticipating. But the important thing is, I know what I was going to say, is that you can be tempted to start letting in as many kids who are not on IEPs as possible because people like it. They like having the program available. It's in the elementary school. It's convenient. That's actually not what it's for. Even though they pay tuition, that's not what it's for. And so that, I think, was something that they were really telling us, the people who were reviewing this, is that you may have lost sight of that a little bit, and that you're using it as a regular kind of preschool, kind of like the CDC used to be at the regional school. But it used to be at the regional school one time. And it's like, it was kind of nice to have that. But this is because we're required by law to offer services for these kids, and we know what's in their best interest, which is to educate them with their gen ed peers, or their typical peers. So beyond that, it's a favor. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but I think it muddies the waters a little bit, in my opinion.
All right, that's interesting. But given that it's only January, this could change, and it's still early, or is this?
If we go back to the historical IEP data, we've never reached capacity. Yes, there's always a risk, but we've never hit 21. And the projection for next year is not that high.
Right.
We're trying to collect as much data as possible for that projection, so hopefully
So
our luck
since
will
we
continue.
legally have to offer it, what would we do if it's 22?
We could get a waiver. We could.
Or if Sherborn was bursting at the seams, but Dover was not, we could do what we did in FY15 and offer spots on the other side of the river. This again is the collaboration piece. It gives us an out, it gives us an option. And rather than say we can't offer the services or we're going to burst at the seams, why not allow ourselves that kind of flexibility?
This is just reiterating what I just said. So the last piece here is just the impact on the special ed administrative reorganization. One of the very strong recommendations that was made was to centralize the IEP process. And we've actually begun to do that this year. And the reason is for efficiencies in processing, for some monitoring and oversight of the IEP process. What they found was that each building operated differently. So we're looking to streamline and to be consistent across all schools. And with that, though, comes needed support at the central office. And the recommendation would be for 2 full-time 12-month positions to support the Director of Student Services. One would be responsible for the IEP management, receiving them, printing them, tracking them, mailing them, keeping data. That was one thing that the audit also found, was that there was very little data that was maintained. So there would be a centralized data repository through all of this as well. And the other administrative assistant would be more focused on the finance, transportation, and general administrative support. Any other questions?
So we covered a lot of ground. But I very much appreciate Debbie spending as much time as she has serving as an interim, to have delved in as deeply as she has is a reflection on her professional kind of nature and caring about kids, whether they're here or wherever.
Can I ask a question before we wrap up? Very thoughtful. Obviously, bringing in an outside lens is nice because it kind of gives you a unbiased view. Obviously, there's experts within our district that are fantastic that have impact or have been involved in that. Thinking about timing and job opening, is this something that goes in phases? Are we going to, some of these things can be sort of planned and discussed, but nothing's going to be implemented until we have a full-time position, or have we even put any sort of thought around that?
Well, I mean, I think we have to, there's certain things we have to have in place. For example, we need to know how many sections of preschool we're operating, because people start planning in advance of that. So that's got to be established before we complete the director search. Other facets of it, like hiring of the special education coordinators, it obviously happens after we hire the Director of Student Services. But for these programs, we're recommending that these programs, or certainly the ASD program, go forward. That's our recommendation now. And the key, I think, for our person coming in is making sure that it's staffed appropriately and that it's been thought through. And I think it has. But we're open to other input or feedback from anyone, really.
I just think, hiring is one thing that can be tricky when you have a new person coming in, if they want to have an impact, opportunity to interview and meet. Obviously, budget is really the oversight of the school committee, so that's where you would need us or ask us for our action. But in terms of structure and organization, that is on the administration, on you guys. So,
right.
And know that you've done it and you've thought about it. Anything we can do to help you and support you, obviously, please reach out to the committees.
Yeah, good enough.
So each committee, just so you know, so Dover's going to see sort of their budgetary impacts, the things we talked about at your meeting tonight. Sherborn, you'll get yours on February 12th when you reconvene, and the region is looking at what their impact is when they meet on February 7th. So those budget numbers that what we've been talking about will be coming forward.
And that's why we did the joint meeting last week, and then the joint meeting this week, and then we go into our budget conversations.
I had a question. For the ASD program, what if the children need support over the summer? Is there any role for that program during the summer months when school? So some of those positions would be 12-month.
It's usually as needed.
They would probably, the positions themselves would be school year per the teacher's contract, and then we would offer ESY services. And we would love for our own staff to be involved in that.
And we have been providing those,
Right.
correct?
Right, we've been doing a lot of summer programming. Each preschool, we're in a summer program. We also had additional staff that were coming in and servicing non-preschool students.
Yeah.
So it's grown a lot, the summer programming with keeping more students in district. So it's actually a very robust summer program. So we would add, some of these children have already been coming to some of the summer supports. So we'd probably just be making sure it aligns with what they're trying to do in the school year.
Because we know that some kids will lose ground, valuable ground. And so it's good questions.
Great.
Thank you.
May I just say in closing that I agree with Mrs. Hauser that our OTs are fabulous, and there's no intention to cut our OTs. I think they work exceptionally hard, and they do so many things. What we're trying to do is streamline that and make their jobs workable and serve our kids.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.